Welcome to the Vintage Ballers Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Coreno. On this episode, we will have former college basketball star Abdul Fox on the show. Abdul played at Rhode Island University before having a very successful career over in Europe. So without further ado, welcome Abdul Fox. Yeah, man, it's great to have you on the show. It was cool connecting with you last week. And, you know, looking at your Rhode Island statistics and your career, you have a pretty fascinating career, and I love to go over. The whole point of this show is to kind of review former players' careers and go over, you know, why they love the game of basketball, what it taught them, and then their highlights, obviously. So, you know, first of all, thank you for coming on, and let's go back to your days in Queens. You grew up in Queens, and you know, back in the '80s, what was basketball like back then, and when did you fall in love with the game?
It's funny. I started off thinking I was going to be a football player first. So I played Pot 1 of football and had a freak accident. I broke my wrist, and then my parents said I couldn't play football anymore. And I remember so vividly. I had an Italian kid in my class say, hey, you know, come to my church team, you know, play basketball. So once my cast was healed, I tried out for his church team. And, you know, only played in gym class. Never really kind of was a talented kid growing up, playing up AAU, playing travel ball. But I made the church team, and we played against this team called the Outlaws, which eventually became Aim High under Vincent Smith, Carol O'Connell. And here was this, you know, not young, but white lady coaching all these black kids from the Queensbridge housing projects, that their skill level to me I was just in awe. But she liked the way I played, and she invited me to come and try out for that team. So hence the fast forward, I tried out for that team. I became part of that organization. And then they passed me on from Carol O'Connell to Vincent Smith, who's Kenny Smith's older brother. And that's when I really started to develop as a basketball player. So I didn't start seriously to probably age 15, 16, when I really decided, you know, got into that kind of routine of, you know, basketball was something that I really loved to do. So I was a late bloomer, to be honest with you.
Wow, I didn't realize that. So with Vincent Smith, you know, take us back to your history with him, and how did you meet, and what impact did he have on your career?
So Carol O'Connell, Vincent Smith, and Kevin Jackson and Pierre Turner all kind of ran the Outlaws. So Carol passed me to Vincent Smith, and I started working out with him at Lost Battalion Hall in Left Rack City. So then you got Kenny Anderson coming to work out, and then Kenny Smith when he was in his off season. So I kind of developed in that culture, and that's who I grew up training with. And just, you know, Saturdays every morning, you know, took the train into Woodhaven Boulevard and walked to the Lost Battalion Hall. And just the constant, you know, repetition reps. And I just got better and I got better. And then they kind of passed me to Kevin Jackson, and I kind of stayed within that program. Then Riverside Church was coming up, the Gauchos, but I was never good enough. Vincent Smith and that group developed me. So I became good enough. And then the Gauchos, then Riverside Church wanted me. I was like, you know what? That's not who raised me. And I stayed loyal to Aim High and the Outlaws.
Wow. That's an incredible history. I mean, back then, Abdul, like obviously, and even now, but NYC, you know, I mean, you produced some of the greatest basketball players, you know, that ever lived. And back then, you know, you mentioned Kenny Anderson. Who were other players back then who were, you know, coming up in the ranks that you
oh, man. You know, Ralph James was on that Malloy team, Rob Rodan, Adrian Autry, Brian Reese, Malik Sealy.
Oh, really? Malik, wow.
Reeves, you know, Tyrone Davis. I mean, it was so many, Jamal Faulkner, Derek Phelps. I mean, it was just, you know, where you turn, you always had a battle. And again, I was that marginal player. I still wasn't, you know, that elite athlete, you know, starting on those teams. I was that marginal player, you know, 8th and 9th man, but I was a sponge. And I, you know, listened to what they told me to do. And all of a sudden I grew to have a skill set. But I didn't grow up, you know, within that conversation of those talented people. That's why you never see me on any of those high school reports at that age, because I wasn't that good.
Were you, did you have a growth spurt, or were you always, you know, what are you, 6'5", 6'6", roughly?
6'6", you know, what's funny, I was a guard, and then I grew. So I had that growth spurt going into my senior year of high school. So I was able to handle the ball, then grew to that size. And, you know, I was developed, you know, to be a shooter. So I, you know, had a skill set that was taught to me on how to really shoot, you know, just fundamentals. No tricks. I'll probably one of the New York City kids with no tricks. Fundamentals, triple threat, one or two dribble moves, pull up, or to the hole. I mean, that was how I was raised, and that's a skill set that helped me get to college.
I mean, fundamentals can take you a long way in any sport, really. It really does. And with you, take us back to your high school days. When did you realize you could play big-time college basketball?
You know, it's funny. I went to St. John's Prep. They had a guy, Rand Fishburne, was probably the premier player. That's when I got really understanding what was the difference between, you know, AAU or Outlaws in high school. And I sat the bench on JV. And then was supposed to go away to prep school. I didn't get in. Ended up going to LIC. They had a kid, Mark Morris, came after me. That's when I started to play, but I was in, I would say, not the right environment. So then I finally got to go away to prep school up in Massachusetts. And that's when I really started to develop as a player. You know, junior year, and then my senior year, you know, we were 23-10. We won the New England championship. I was all conference. But that's when I really blossomed. But my sophomore, junior year, it was still, you know, skinny kid. The only basketball camp I went to was Jack Curran's basketball camp at Fordham University. So, you know, I was still under the radar, I would say.
And before you went to Rhode Island, you went to St. Peter's, correct?
Yeah, you know, being that I went to a prep school known for academics, I didn't go to Oak Hill, I didn't go to MCI. Even though I had a great senior year, I didn't really have a lot of Division I offers. At that time, you know, Georgia Tech was looking at me, but when they signed Kenny, it was like, listen, we got a great recruiting year. Let us know if we can help you. They dropped me. So I took a visit to Springfield College, Division II. And then out of nowhere, St. Peter's College kind of reached out to me from a coach who recommended that I was good. Then I went to St. Peter's College. You know, I had I would say, an average freshman year. I ran into a little rift. I'm from Queens. The point guard was from New Jersey. The starting two guard, to make a long story short, was winning all the preseason conditionings. I ran cross country in high school and track to stay in shape for basketball. So here I am, a freshman, just happy to play Division I. Now I'm beating the senior captain in all of preseason races, and I'm having a little rift with the point guard from New Jersey. So what I thought could just been just happy to play Division I ran into a little turmoil at St. Peter's. So after my freshman year, I didn't want to stay at St. Peter's. And, you know, I had some friends who went to Fordham, Jean Prelude, and I wanted to transfer in conference, but the athletic director said, if you transfer in conference and we find any tampering, we're going to call the NCAA. So I literally looked up Rhode Island in the Street and Smith's basketball book. And I had a friend, Abdul Fox, that went to Providence. He called Rhode Island on a whim and said, hey, I got this kid who wants to transfer. Will you look at him? And, you know, I sent him my transcript. I got a pretty good recommendation from Tom Kachowski. And my AD said, look, the kid's a good player. You know, he's just having a little trouble here at St. Peter's. So Rhode Island didn't even recruit me. I kind of fell into their lap.
Wow.
Which, yeah, when we get to the Rhode Island story, that's another conversation because the starting two guard went to Oak Hill. So here I am, a transfer, competing with a starting two guard when I felt I should have started all 3 years. I didn't start at Rhode Island until my senior year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you, when you started really developing, were there any players specifically in college or the NBA that you looked up to, you know, to kind of model your game after in that era?
Well, when I was at St. Peter's, Lionel Simmons was the premier player in that conference.
Yeah.
So
yep.
I kind of watched him, how he kind of carried himself. But, you know, as a two guard, you know, I just grew up, you know, 80s, he was either Magic, you know, Scottie Pippen, you know, sort of remind me of the tall guards that I kind of felt that I could kind of role model, you know, play defense and still be able to score. So those were some of the people, you know, I looked up to trying to become. I didn't really care about college players because, you know, I was just trying to come at you. So I didn't really have a lot of respect for anybody.
Okay. That's how it should be. You got to do what you got to do. That era was, I mean, the 80s and 90s obviously was such a different era, but it really, you know, the game to me evolved so much in that era from what it was the previous, you know, 30, 40 years. And, you know, there was more athleticism. There was, you know, Scottie Pippen, for example, when he guarded Magic in the finals, it changed the entire series, you know, because having a tall 6'7" athletic guard that took on Magic, and Magic is known as the greatest point guard of all time. And he had trouble, you know, setting up the offense. So guys like you, your prototype of a play, you know, the 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", super athletic type of guard wing really started changing the game to me. And now it's prevalent everywhere you look in the NBA now, those kind of guys exist. But, you know, back in those days, the big man dominated. So that wasn't the thing as much. So it had to be interesting for you coming up with that type of, you know, skill set.
It's funny. I think that's what allowed me, or why, the Bulls took an interest in me. I was the last cut of the Bulls in '96, but you had to learn that triangle offense, and they enjoyed big guards. They didn't really have a strategic point guard, but Magic and Pippen kind of played that same role. But because of my size and able to handle the ball, I made it to the last cut of the Bulls. But it was just great to try to understand that offense and really understand what it was to be that size and be able to do so many things. I could play the 1, 2, and 3 by the time I came out of college.
Wow. You're right. Because MJ, Ron Harper, Pippen, they all kind of played that same role. I mean, there was really no defined point guard, or they all just. So I mean, interesting for a team that won all those championships to not even have a defined point guard is very fascinating.
It's fascinating to watch. Fascinating.
And really, no true big man scorer. I mean, no disrespect to Dennis or Luke or those guys, but they didn't have an Olajuwon or a Shaq. It was just, the wings really that did a lot of the scoring.
It was funny. It was like a piece to a puzzle. Will Purdue, Bill Cartwright, Jason Williams, they all kind of fit. Dickie Simpkins, they all fit that big man, not really in the post, but could hit a mid-range jumper and was able to kind of pass. They didn't have, like you say, a drop-in post. Okay, let me get 15 to 20 and drop it inside. It was like a piece of the puzzle. Every year, they filled that void with that big man. Bill Whittington, you name it. They all kind of same prototype.
Exactly. And again, obviously they had MJ and Pip, so we know that they had dynamic talent. But still, I mean, you look at the recipe for championships, it was, at that time, that wasn't the recipe, as far as most teams had a big man, that Patrick Ewings and Robinson and Dream, those guys, or you won, you had a point guard like Magic or Stockton or guys like that. You didn't necessarily win by having, athletic wings that could all kind of score and the triangle offense and all that, and bigs that really served a role, like you said, and weren't, meant to score. That was just uncommon at that time. So the fact that they won 6 championships, shows you how great Michael was and how great Scotty was, and Phil Jackson and Tex Winter and all those guys.
It's funny, Mike and Pip tend to take the credit, but Phil was just an amazing coach of the mind to keep all those personalities in sync, not having the ego. I really got to understand him as a coach. He had what we call a war room. That's what we had our videotapes, was just all strategic figures from war. And he just tapped into everyone's mindset. Even how he dealt with Dennis was, he was having trouble. They were having trouble with San Antonio. He came to Chicago. It was no problem. And I think a sleeper is Ron Harper and Tony Kukoc. 6'7", left-handed. Like, you sleep on those two guys, but they played a big role. I
mean, I'm from Cleveland, and Ron obviously was a Cav to start his career. Yeah. And one of the worst. Yeah, that we won't get into that whole trade, but people forget the Cavs had a squad back then. You had Brad Daugherty and Price and Elo and Hot Rod Williams and Larry Nance and Harper. That was a squad. And if it wasn't for MJ, that team, in the Bad Boy Pistons, that team was probably the third best team in the East back then. Yeah. In the late 80s, early 90s. So Mark Price is probably the most underrated point guards of that entire era. And I've talked to a couple other former point guards who told me that kid was, he's incredible. And he was the original pick and roll point guard, him, almost like a Stockton, and he had a lot of variations to his game. And Brad Daugherty was one of the top 10 centers that era. So anyways, Harper, I remember in the Last Dance, he talked about how on the, the shot, he wanted to guard MJ, and they put Craig Elo, and Lenny put Craig Elo on him. And he's like, I don't know what to say. And I'm not saying it would have been different. It's MJ, but who knows? You never know. I mean, but you're right. Ron was extremely underrated on those Bulls teams. I think he never gets the credit he deserves. But him and Kukoc, like you said, are probably the two most underrated guys on that team, because the big three, Rodman, Pip, MJ, of course they get most of the credit. And then Phil, we'll get into that. I want to get into your experience there a little bit later.
Yeah,
but, let's get back to your Rhode Island days. So, okay, you go in as a sophomore, I believe. And, what was it like, and how did you kind of transition into Rhode Island?
So I had to sit out. Back then Division I rules were different. So I sat out a year. I played intramurals with a kid out of Hempstead called Kyle Ivy Jones. 6'8", could do it all. He was Prop 48. So we sat out together, won an intramural championship, and we just stayed active. And in my sophomore year, we went to the NIT, the game before the Garden. But I didn't start. Came off the bench, probably averaged about 9 points. Just a hard worker, diving for loose balls, do what I had to do to get on the court. And then my junior year, I started to blossom. But what's crazy, if you ever go back, I was 9th on the team in minutes. I led the team in scoring, and I was second team all conference.
And you were 9th in minutes?
9th in minutes.
Why was that?
Again, the guy in front of me went to Oak Hill. I didn't go to Oak Hill. I transferred in. So I wasn't Al Skinner's recruit. So it wasn't like, okay, let me play this kid. But at the same time, how you lead this team in scoring? You're only ninth on the team in minutes.
I've never heard anything like that before.
Exactly. But I played my role. I did what I had to do. The first team was all NBA. Eddie Jones, Aaron McKee, Yinka Dare, and Marcus Camby. I was second team as a non-starter.
Wow. Yeah, and all those names, I mean, I would love to look up, these stats and see if there's anybody else in the nation at that time who was ninth in minutes on their team that led their team in scoring. There's no way. You had to be the only one.
Yeah, it was. And again, you don't know it, being that young, you just want to do what you can. Your dream is the league, and you do what you can to stay on the floor. So I didn't have a riff with the coach. It's just, it wasn't a distraction. It's what I had to do to be productive, and we won. So I just took it what it was worth.
That's what a team player does. And I'm sure he respected that out of you and saw that from you. Yeah. So getting to now, your senior year, you averaged, I think, 17 points a game. And, were you, at that time, you were coming into your own, obviously, but were you primarily a shooting guard or a small forward? I know you kind of play a little bit of both, but what did you define yourself as?
A shooting guard. I could really shoot. And, I didn't embarrass you. I would get 30. You wouldn't know I had 30 because all I did is run back and play defense. And, had great, down pickers. Like my centers really got me open. And I really had a niche for not missing open jump shots. Like you see some kids, I see them shooting and they're just missing. Like that's not, I didn't miss many shots. So it wasn't like I shot 30 shots. I was 9 for 12, couple free throws, a 3 a dunk. Before you know it, I got 20 to 25 on just being very efficient with what I had, I would say, at Rhode Island.
Give me a couple of your better games. Like, is there 2 or 3 games that stand out to you? I know you said you faced like Howard Isley in the NIT. What other players did you go against that you loved competing against in that era? And then give me 1 or 2 of your best games.
Well, Temple was always tough. They had Eddie Jones and Aaron McKee. West Virginia was still in the A-10 back then. Rutgers had Steve Worthy. UMass, Calipari was still at UMass. So just to get the respect in the A-10 was something I really took pride in, and just competing every night as a 2-guard. But I think the NIT was a great time for me because Boston College was ahead at halftime. So in NIT, they kind of strategically placed you at the next game. They already had the next game thinking Boston College was going to win. I ended up having 19, 20 points. And that was probably the first time I started. He said, okay, let me start Abdul in the NIT. So then I started, probably say one of my better games against Howard Isley. I think Gerard Abrams was on that team, and Billy Curley was on that team.
Oh, Bill Curley. Wow.
Bill. Yeah. So we beat them in NIT and then, ended up advancing to play Utah. The game before the Garden, which we had 5 guys that were from New York, but we ended up losing to Utah. I think due to the altitude, we weren't ready for that. So
was Van Horn on that team? Yeah, Utah team, or just before he came?
He was either hurt or he sat out that team. They had a guy, Paul Afiaki, and a little guard.
Okay.
And we just ran out of gas.
And that must have been right before their Andre Miller days too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. And did you face, was Marcus Camby at UMass at that time when you were?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yep.
Yes, sir.
There's a lot of talent.
Abrams. Yeah. So that A-10, I think, was neck and neck with the Big East. And then they broke it up. They took West Virginia, they took Rutgers, and then the NIT, the A-10, not that it fizzled out. It just wasn't, I think, a powerhouse conference as it was back in the 90s coming up. I mean, even Rick Brunson was on that Temple team. Like,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're naming these guys, and I forgot because I was, a little kid. I was probably 10, 12 years old back then. But I always got all the college and NBA books. So I studied every roster. I was obsessed with it. And back in my era, when we were kids, college basketball was huge back then for my era. It's not as big now with the kids nowadays. College football's bigger. But back then, college basketball was the thing. I mean, we loved watching them. I mean, Vince Carter, Tim Duncan, you name it. I mean, it was just one stud after another. And it seemed like a lot of guys stayed 4 years. So there was a lot of great competition and a lot of back and forth. You had the Fab Five, of course. So, looking back, when you're naming some of these guys, I mean, Eddie Jones and McKee and these guys, I mean, these are, for the young kids listening, this is, these are big time guys who, these are all stars. And Eddie Jones is an all-star. I mean, they're
the Lakers,
big time players. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Him and Van Exel for years were a great duo. Yeah. So, looking back at your Rhode Island days, Abdul, what's your one takeaway? What did you learn the most in those 3 years playing for Rhode Island?
I really understood team concept. even though I felt I should have played more, that's not what, a team is made of. We went to the NCAA tournament, and I'll never forget, we're having the podium press conference, and Purdue has the big dog, Glenn Robinson.
Yep.
So they're talking about, oh, what a great matchup it'd be with Purdue against North Carolina in the second round. So, here I am, a kid from Queens. I tapped the mic. I was like, you know what? They haven't played us yet. And you're talking about this matchup with Purdue and North Carolina. So that was probably one of my highlight moments. We beat Purdue with Glenn Robinson, and we ended up losing to North Carolina, the year they win their national championship. But, just as a kid, all you want to do is go to the dance. All you want to do is go to the dance when you get to college. So to be able to say that happened during my era of my time, I feel blessed.
Well, I never realized you beat Big Dog in '93. That's an incredible win.
Yes, sir. Him and Quanzo Martin, I think, was the other guard.
Quanzo, yep. Oh, yeah. I mean, Big Dog was, 94, but, his senior year, he was, I think he dropped 50. I mean, he was unbelievable.
He had about 35 on us. It wasn't no cakewalk, but we got the W.
Wow. And Carolina, of course, ended up, beating the famous Weber timeout, beating Michigan in the
timeout, yeah.
Yep.
And what's crazy is, we in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and we play in North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
I never forget, you have the pregame scouting report. The coach, no defense, he just said, just go have fun. Because they had Eric Montrose, George Lynch, Derek Phelps, Brian Reese, and Donald Williams. Like,
wow.
We did what we could, but man, it was tough.
Yeah, you're facing that. Carolina, especially in those days. that was a powerhouse.
Yeah, it might have been Dean's last year, so it was just iconic to be able to match up against them.
Yeah, it was. You can always say that.
Derek Phelps in Queens, New York, we grew up playing against each other, so we had a good time, but we got blown out. Yeah,
but that's nothing to be ashamed of, though. Not many teams would face. Not many teams back then were competing against Carolina.
Right.
Okay, so let's go post Rhode Island, and first of all, I want to get back to. I know that you took Tyson Wheeler, I believe you said, had a recruiting trip to Rhode Island, and then of course you played with Lamar back in your high school days or when he?
Yeah, he played for Aim High Outlaws. He was just on a younger team, so I always got to play with him as he came up, and Catino Mobley was the other kid that kind of sat behind me and was just a sponge, and just kind of watch him develop and have his career was just, to me, just fun to watch.
And those Rhode Island teams, I was mentioning to a couple of my buddies, we all obviously remember those teams, the Catino, Odom, the late 90s teams. They were loaded, and that was one of the better teams in college basketball. So it's interesting that you were right before then. You got to kind of see those guys progress and do what they did, but it had to be, fun for you to watch your alma mater, have that much success.
It was funny. I was 1 year short. Jim Harrick came in, and then the money just started flowing, and they started winning. I was like, man, 1 year too late. But, I was just happy to see the program still move forward. And, I still take a lot of pride when they play. And then, I wear that bravado that I was a Rhode Island Ram. Oh,
absolutely. And again, Lamar ended up getting a couple rings in the NBA, and Catino had a very nice career. I mean, those guys are, you guys produce some excellent players. So right after you graduate, and you're trying to get into the NBA, go through that process and go through the next couple of years. And what was it like for you?
I was the last cut of the Nuggets. I used to live with Mutombo. He let me live in the basement. That was Jalen Rose's first year out as well. And just learning the transition, I was drafted by the Pittsburgh Piranhas in the CBA. And not that I didn't have a respect, I didn't understand the politics. When I had a dream of the NBA, it's just the best players played. That's the pinnacle. Not, I think I should have made the Nuggets, but Darnell Mee had the same age as Dikembe Mutombo. And it was Dikembe Mutombo's next year was his contract year. So they explained to me, hey, we got to release you, even though you're great, but, we got to make this move because Darnell's Mutombo's agent. I was like, what? Like, that didn't make sense to me. So trying to understand the politics and still have the work ethic and the mindset to be successful. So I chased the CBA off and on the first 2 years, still wanting to play in the NBA. And even in the CBA, JoJo English, that got cut from the Bulls, he was on the same team. So he comes in and I go from starting to sitting. So I just didn't understand that part of the business side of, chasing the NBA. And then once I got released from the Bulls, I felt I reached the pinnacle, where I realized I belong. But, it just so happened, I went overseas and just fell in love with that experience. But, just trying to chase the NBA as a young kid, trying to understand what it is to be a professional, sleeping at night, those things I didn't really have a mentor. I was kind of, trying to find out on my own.
So Abdul, one of the reasons I love your story, my brother was a pretty good player back in the day. Back in your era, 91, he graduated high school. So he was with the Fab Five, that whole class. And he
Yeah.
was the leading scorer in the city of Cleveland, actually, at 31 points a game back in 91. So,
Wow.
but he was, the problem with him, Brett, is that he was 6'5", but he was a center and he was slow. So he could jump, he could shoot. I mean, everything else. So they had two scouts, one from the Sonics and Warriors. And he went to an NAI school, Rio Grande in Ohio. And they told him, they said, if you were either 4 or 5 inches taller or faster, you'll be a draft pick. But you're not going to be able to hang with those guys. At 6'5", you can't. He's not going to be able to guard the two guards in the NBA. And he was too short. He just couldn't make it at center. So, but I saw what he went through, and he even debated going overseas and all that. But then he ended up just coaching high school basketball and marrying his now wife, which worked out well for him. But at the same time, I saw the same thing that you went through, and and he had a ton of talent. And to see the guys as talented as you and him, it just shows you how tough it is to get into the NBA and what it really means to compete at that level and to play big time college basketball or to play, over in Europe. People don't understand the kind of talent you have to have and the work ethic you have to have. So again, what was your European experience like? And what did that teach you about yourself and the game of basketball?
I think the European experience developed me as a person, being able to embrace another culture, embrace another language. I wanted to learn another language. I wanted to, understand when I was in Croatia, or kind of understand and learn, Hebrew when I was in Israel. I embraced that. But at the same time, the basketball was a very high level. Paul Gasol was still at Barcelona. Manu Ginobili was still at Team System Bologna. So Tony Parker was still in France. So that was the year they realized they needed to send the NBA players to Europe because they were getting their butts kicked in the Olympics. So for me to travel the world, still get paid, and play at a high level, I didn't really care if you didn't know who I was because I wasn't in the NBA. I just cared about them putting the dollar signs in my account every month. So I embraced it, and every year I would kind of look and say, okay, I want to live in Italy. I want to live in France. I want to go to Germany. And I was able to do that, because of the game of basketball. And to me, still play at a high level. I won a championship in Italy. I won a championship in Switzerland. And I'm a quiet kid from Queens, so I really take pride in those things happening, during my career. But I didn't care if you didn't know who I was because I didn't play the NBA. But when I played in New York in the summer leagues, I had a lot of respect for what I did.
I mean, that whole experience to me is just a once in a lifetime experience. To go over to Europe to play basketball, and I had a buddy of mine that played in Iceland, and I said my brother knew people that played in Europe, of course, a lot of the guys he played against in college. So it's just an experience to me that not many people will ever have, and just living in Europe and then playing basketball professionally over there, that's pretty cool. Who were some of the guys you faced? You were talking about some of the guys who played over there at the time. Were there a couple guys you played against that were that either made it to the NBA or that had careers that you want people to know about?
Well, Manu Ginobili I played against in Italy. Was a kid from Georgia Tech. What was the least? Brian Oliver from Georgia Tech.
Brian Oliver, yep.
A couple of guys from Kansas, Steve Woodbury. I mean, some premier players who you wonder where they were. Dominique was over at the time. Who did Tel Aviv have? Anthony Parker.
Wow.
Was at Tel Aviv. So it was just competitive, especially as a two guard. Not even just take away the competitiveness. Your job is to score. So when we talk about job security, if you're a two guard, you average 4 points. Trust me, your ass is getting sent home. So even just the pressure of being in my position and able to sustain a career year after year, I think when you look back was, to me, tough in itself. Always looking over your shoulder like, man, I got 8 points to get. Next game, I better have 25. Otherwise, they're going to find someone else in my position. But I played with a great center, Albert Burdett, played at Texas, and, had a great year. And a funny small story just to share with you, when I won a championship in Italy, I don't know if you remember the kid Moretti that played at Texas Tech when they went to the Final Four, that Italian kid Moretti. He was 1 year old. His dad was the two guard on our Italian team. So he was on that Texas Tech team that went to the Final Four. And that's just a crazy story to watch that kind of progress, and just how that happened to some experience while I was in Europe.
And that's the thing about guys like you who have been around the game so long. You see all the different connections after a while. People who know people, and and that's what I saw growing up with my brother, and just the people that he knew, and then people he played with in AAU, and you get to know, oh yeah, that guy's cousin's this guy, and it's pretty cool. And you see over the period of years, oh yeah, little brother's coming up now, and so I remember coming up as a little kid, and I was not I was decent, but I was not my brother at all. And I was
Right.
super skinny, and he was 6'5" and much bigger. And I remember the high school I went to was a rival high school to my brother's high school. He's the all-time leading scorer at that high school. So they thought they were getting another, like little Coreno. I kept, this kid's little brother's coming here. And it was so much pressure on me. And this is going to sound bad, Abdul, but I actually, after, a few years, after 1 year of high school, I quit because I couldn't take the pressure. And, I look back and I don't regret it because I didn't have the same passion for playing as my brother did, but I couldn't, having that pressure of people thinking you're going to be like, a guy who was scoring 31 points a game. That was not me, and I look back on it. It was a lot of lessons for me and my brother. And my brother was the first one to tell me, he's like, if you don't have the passion for it, don't do it. I don't want to force you into doing something you don't want to do. But I love the game of basketball. I just realized that I like talking like this more. I like talking about it more than I did playing it. But, his dedication, I didn't have that same dedication to the game that he did. And he would be out in the winter, in Cleveland, in snow, shooting baskets. And that's, as that's what you have to have. So, but it taught me a lot. It's funny because names travel. And my high school coach, he told me, he's like, oh, this kid's brother was the best player in Cleveland, 10 years ago, blah, blah, blah. So I felt this pressure, and no one put it on me. I just felt the pressure. And again, so, looking at you, and a couple of the guys I've interviewed in the past also played in the CBA and played in Europe. And I love those stories because it tells me that you have a lot of perseverance. So let's get back real quick to your Bulls days, or, when you tried out for the Bulls. What was it like with that experience? And, what was it like with Phil and MJ and those guys? And what did you learn from that?
It's funny. I kept a journal for about 2 months, just on, interaction with Dennis Rodman. The first time Michael even just walked in the building, it seemed like everything was in slow motion. What's crazy is that was John Paxson's first year as an assistant coach.
Okay.
And he wrote me a handwritten letter when I got released, that I keep framed in the house, just saying, the work ethic I had and what a pleasure it was to coach. But to watch Michael be the first one in, the last one to leave, I thought I had a work ethic until I ran into him. But I was just, the respect I had from him after about 2-3 weeks, I had to stop because I wasn't playing as well because I had too much respect for him. And I remember there was a day where we didn't lose in practice. And, you think, I was Michael's enemy just because we didn't lose a practice game. And from that day on in, he just tried to destroy me in practice. It was like, wow, dude, I'm just trying to make the team. But he was just so competitive that he was pissed that we didn't lose a practice game. And, it's funny, I have a pair of shoes that he signed when I got released. And, he just, was just the amount of respect he had for me just trying to make the team. I didn't ask for nothing. And then my locker was right next to his. And it was just amazing just to watch that whole experience of Dennis Rodman coming aboard. And you almost knew, I knew it was going to happen. So when I got released, I was like, man, they're going to win it. I know they're going to win it. And sure enough, they go 72-10. But just a lot of respect. And I just enjoyed the experience of competing at that level. Like, you think of my assignment, I'm a guard. So either I got Ron Harper, Steve Kerr, Tony Kukoc, Scottie Pippen, and Michael Jordan. That's my practice.
Wow.
So you go ahead and pick your poison on which day you show up. There's no off days. No off days.
I can't imagine that. How many people can tell you they had that experience playing, that's, and those guys, I mean, they didn't really, that team was pretty tight knit as far as they didn't really have a lot of turnover every year. I mean, they had the same core 10 guys pretty much every year, but for those 3 years. So the fact that you were someone even invited to camp and to try out, is an honor. And the fact that you almost made the team, I mean, that's a pretty big honor.
Yeah. Now, I tell you the funniest story that I'm kicking my butt to this day. He gave me everything, all this practice stuff with number 45. He said, I don't want to have shit to do with that number. That's the year they lost. Me not thinking to save it, I go to the hood and I give it out to all the kids I grew up with, not thinking that I should have saved it. It's just because you don't think it's going to end. You think you belong, you don't think it's going to end. And at that point, I really said, listen, I can't respect the guy as much because I'm playing like trash. But the thing, he's like, here, man, here's all my practice stuff with number 45. And I didn't hoard that stuff. I'm smacking myself in the head to this day.
There's some kid right now who has a lot of money in his closet.
It was just unbelievable. Unbelievable.
So looking back at your career, first of all, when did you stop playing? What year?
It's funny. I stopped in was it 2003? It was a combination of things. I played my last year in Italy, Rimini, and the business side really came out. We had two Brazilian kids who went past the ball. Then we had a coach who was from Turkey who was just verbally abusive. So I was like, man, this basketball stuff. And a good friend of mine had retired, moved to Tampa. So I went to Tampa on vacation. Ended up, purchasing a home that I thought was going to be an investment property. And my brother's senior year of high school, I'd never seen my brother play high school basketball. Ended up going to the same prep school as I did. So I said, you know what, Fox, take the year off. I had no furniture. I had to furnish the house. I didn't know you had to pick the chrome molding and the doorknobs. I didn't know none of that. I'm from New York. I think you just buy the house and everything's good. So I took the year off, and I kind of went cold turkey. I kind of fell into some business opportunities, and I kind of never looked back. So I stopped at 31, 32 when I don't think I should have or could have kept playing. But the combination of the business, the house, the brother senior year of high school, I had to take more time to help him get his college career, end up going to Manhattan College. So I kind of went cold turkey at 31, 32 and kind of never looked back.
Do you have, any regrets in your career or anything you wish you would have done differently?
I don't know if I regret what I would have done differently. My junior year, I'm second team all conference. We go to the NCAA tournament, we lose to Purdue. My senior year, all my stats go up, everything, points per game, assists, rebounds, and I get demoted to third team. I took the plaque and I threw it across the room at the A10 banquet. I said, this is bullshit, because I knew I put in the work and everything went better, but hence the team didn't do well. So when the team didn't do well, I guess it reflected on whatever, my position, but I felt an injustice, and I might have not done that, looking back. But, you're emotionally attached to the game. I knew the amount of effort I put in. I had my own keys to the gym during my tenure at Rhode Island. So I knew the amount of effort I put in. So I felt like that was a slap in the face. But
I mean,
Bill Cosby was the guest speaker. I took the plaque, threw it across the room.
I mean, you're a young kid at the time. You're emotional. And like you said, you worked your ass off. Like, it is what it is. And I think it kind of shows how much dedication you had for the game.
Yeah, other than that, I wouldn't change anything. Transferring to Rhode Island, I had a great experience. My parents got to see me play. St. Peter's had taught me a lot about, dealing with different personalities. And, I'd have loved to stay at St. Peter's, but it just didn't happen that way. But I wouldn't change anything. I think, you probably heard you got to learn from your failures and become a better person. And even at the age I am, I'm still trying to become a better person and learn from failures and successes. So I enjoyed it, man. I enjoyed it.
Okay, a couple more questions for you, Abdul.
Yeah, man.
Number one, for people that never saw you play, and especially the younger kids who never saw that era of college basketball, what do you want them to know about the legacy of Abdul Fox?
Wow, I would say self-made. To arrive by the time I'm a senior in college, to be at the same level of all Americans who were in high school, to me was something I cherished. And that was self-made. That was hours in the gym. Even if I dated a girl, I asked her, could she come rebound for me? So, and then perseverance. Not that I hate, but when kids say, oh, the coach is jerking me, don't tell me about a coach jerking you. If you play 12 minutes, you maximize your 12 minutes. And that's what I went through, my tenure at Rhode Island, my junior year. I didn't point the finger to the coach is jerking me. If I played 18 minutes, I got 19 points. Like, that's just what it was. That's what I had to do to be successful. So I would love to share that with young kids, just the work ethic, and don't be afraid to be self-made. Don't be looking at the newspapers because he's All-American. You can eventually catch up to that person.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great advice. And it's funny, you kind of sound like my brother a lot because he's similar in age, and he has that same mindset. He's a coach, and he always says, hey, when you get out there, you play your ass off. End of story.
Yeah.
You don't bitch, you don't moan, you go out there and play your ass off. So I definitely can appreciate that mentality. My last question, Abdul, is what are you up to nowadays? And what do you want, is there anything going on as far as business ventures or?
I've been blessed. I'm a franchisee of a fitness modality called Orange Theory Fitness. I've been with them for about 10 years. When I started with them, I just started as a coach. There were 2 in the world. There's 1,300 now. And there's some in, Singapore, there's some in Dubai. So I've been blessed to be a part of that. But my baby right now is probably called Red Line Athletics. It's a youth athletic training center. And I mainly try to help develop the basketball piece because, you know, that's where my love is. But it really gives me an opportunity to get back and coach and just, to me, pour into kids what I experienced or the skill set that I can give them on being the best person or best player that they can be. You know, I had a privilege of coaching the AAU team, but in the beginning, I couldn't understand them because I couldn't understand their work ethic. I was like, I don't understand how you can show up in a facility like this and not give me 120%. I wasn't the talented kid. You know, I had the pleasure of having a partner, Malik Hightower. He was All-American. I was like, that's the talented. I'm not the talented person. So if you don't come in here and work, it's hard for me to understand. So I try to give that back to the youth. And Redline Athletics is probably my new baby.
Is there a website for that?
Yeah, www.redlineathletics.com. We have 2 in Georgia, and then we have the rights to build some from Tampa all the way to Miami. So I'm eventually hoping to get back to Florida and help develop the brand in those regions.
Excellent.
Well, yeah, man. It's a blessing.
I mean, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show, and you're welcome back anytime. And, you know, again, your story is one I think that a lot of people will appreciate because, you know, the underdog story and trying to get to a certain point. And you really were an overachiever in many ways because, again, not even starting playing basketball until you're 15, 16. Yeah. I mean, playing at Rhode Island and, you know, second team, all conference, et cetera, et cetera. That's a, you know, an overachiever in my opinion. That's someone who really worked their, you know, tail off to get to where they eventually got to. And I think, you know, and not even counting your Bull stories and you're playing in Europe and all of that, I think you have a pretty, you know, awesome story for the youth to hear.
I appreciate that, man. And I want to thank you for having the opportunity to be on and share that story. And, you know, the people that know me to come up, they be like, yo, the kid was a sleeper. And if you ever look back to see what he's done, it's pretty impressive. Like even just my New York City championship, you know, Ron Artest was on my team in high school.
Wow.
You know, won the New York City Pro-Am, you know, with 3 different teams. And the people that know me during that era, like, man, the kid was the truth. But at the same time, I wasn't flashy. I didn't talk no junk. You know, I just put the ball in the basket. I ran back on defense.
You just did your thing. Yeah, the team guy, ultimate team guy. Love that.
No rucker, no nickname, but basics.
I love it. Well, again, my man, thank you for coming on. So we'll have to do this again soon. All right.
Appreciate it, Brad. If you let me know if you need anything, man. Appreciate it.
I will. All right. Thanks, Abdul. Have a good weekend.
You got it.
Okay. Thanks.